Come to the studio this evening. Hilarious and tender and mad and harrowing and wistful and always beautifully written. A wonderful book. And that's
my new book. It's called Staring at Lakes.
okay.
Yeah. So it's going down well.
Yes,
Yeah,
we were
and
last
it's selling well.
You went straight in at #1.
Yeah, in the non-fiction bestseller list in Ireland, it's #1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had a reading in the JCL last night.
That's
and
right.
It was
Yeah.
a mighty evening, wasn't
Well,
it?
it was a great evening.
It was.
Particularly for me, it was personal because there were two great writers in Cavan that kind of were mentors for me. One was Dermot Healy,
Yeah.
great prose writer, and Tom McIntyre, a great
Yeah.
poet and dramatist. And Cavan has a huge amount of talent, you know, in theatre and this, that and the other. But they, for me, were kind of mentors. And to be back there and they were present and loads of people that my family would be connected with, and particularly my mother,
Yeah.
who died last summer, and people that were her friends were there. It was a very special night for me, you know.
It was.
Yeah.
Tom McIntyre did a wonderful opening. He
Yeah.
read the letter that he wrote to you when you sent him the first script.
Yeah, Tom, you know, he liked the book. He encouraged me. He encouraged me always as a writer when, like, he'd be older than me, but when I was in my early 20s and dreaming about being a writer, he was a great encouragement. So it was lovely to have him there. And I mean, the book is also personal to Cavan because it's the story, it's my story in the sense of, you know, I grew up in Cavan in the town, and I used to cycle out to Killikeen and Lough Oughter as a young teenager, and I'd be there fishing and taking home, you get an owl, you know, a Sally branch, and you'd stick 7 or 8 pike on it and put it on the back of the bike when you'd be coming home. I wasn't much of a fisherman, but I was a dreamer, you know. I'd stand there just looking out from the shoreline of Lough Oughter at the castle or at Killikeen at the bridge, and I loved where I came from. I loved the lakes, and I travelled really all over the world. I talk in the book about going to India,
Yeah.
and I talk about going to Mongolia. I travelled about 2,500 miles through Mongolia in a jeep with a Buddhist monk,
Yeah.
and again I ended up at a very beautiful lake in Mongolia, and I remember standing on the edge of it and having a peace and serenity, just standing there at the lake in Mongolia and thinking about Lough Oughter and Cavan and feeling that I had come back home,
Yeah.
you know.
So you were in the peace of now.
I think in the peace of now,
Yeah.
yeah, The Power of Now. Eckhart Tolle has a great book, The Power of Now. And being in the moment, I think, is the great freedom in life. You know, you use religion all your life to try and find meaning, and you think maybe there's a heaven or maybe there's a hell and all this stuff. Maybe there's a God, maybe there's not a God. And I went through that. I was a priest in Cavan at
That's
one
right,
stage.
yeah.
But I grew out of it, you know what I mean? Like, very quickly it didn't work for me. And I studied Buddhist philosophy for about 17 years and practiced, you know, Buddhist practices. Because there's a wonderful place in Cavan, the Jampa Ling is a Tibetan Buddhist centre in Bombay, and there's a Tibetan Lama there, and that gives great opportunities to people, you know, to come and meditate and be peaceful and kind of find the presence, you know, to stepping into the present moment and not having anxieties about the past or the future. That's a beautiful space to be in, and that's me.
Yeah, you're right when you're saying, you know, most of us are questioning our being, our life purpose.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's very hard to address that. And in art, I sometimes feel you can do that, like through music, through writing, through painting, through sculpture, through whatever. You've done that. You've done your writing. You've done your spiritual searching. Yeah. Have you arrived at it now?
No, I've only arrived at the sense of being in the moment. I feel that all the kind of intellectual stuff about, you know, we try and give ourselves an idea of meaning from religion. And I think that in Ireland at the moment we're discovering that we need to let go of a lot of that.
Yeah.
I think the trauma in Ireland at the moment is to do with the fact that we have let go of a lot of faith experience, but we still want to be faithful. Yeah. You know, we still want to believe. We still want to pray.
Is that like more spiritualism than
Well, I think you can do it. I think you can do it in a Catholic church or a Buddhist centre or anywhere you want. Personally, I was in Warsaw recently. I love Poland, and it's a beautiful, beautiful country. But I was in a chapel, a church in the middle of Warsaw, and there was a beautiful icon of the Virgin Mary, and I lit my candle with everybody else, and I said my prayer like everybody else, and I hoped that the mother was watching me. You know, that's very beautiful poetry. You know, to express oneself religiously, devotionally, is a very beautiful poetry. What gets us caught up are the ideas, the intellectual ideas.
Sort of the
that you're in a club and there are rules and all that stuff.
You have to conform.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that the people in Ireland, as well as, you know, in most of Western countries, have kind of grown up a little bit from that sort of obedience position where you just sort of don't think for yourself and take all the rules from somebody else. Yeah. And I think people realise now that spirituality is about questioning and about asking yourself questions and sometimes saying, I don't know. You know, my book is also about leaving your wife, getting fed up with marriage after about 15 years and thinking, maybe I should go somewhere else. And men are like that. Men look for younger women. Now, they don't all leave their wives, but secretly every husband goes through a period where he feels a little bit...
Every husband?
Every human being. And I think women do too. I mean, I certainly think women have the same kind of feelings of wanting to explore the rest of the world, and you're looking at your husband and the way he does the shopping, or the way he leaves his nail clippers on the floor of the bathroom, and you say, why am I living with this guy? But that's human.
Yeah. You know? Apart from that, you know, situations, people change as they develop. You know, they change at different stages of life.
Yeah.
So the spirituality and the meaning of life changes as well, perhaps.
It does, yeah.
And we're still searching all the time.
Yeah, because when you're in your 30s or 20s, 30s maybe, you're looking to the future. You're looking out there into the wide world and saying, maybe I'll find wonderful adventures in Germany or New York or Chicago or somewhere, and that they will change me and I will become wise and deep. Now, when you're my age, I'm 59, you're not looking out into the future anymore. You're looking into the big black hole in Cully's or some other graveyard. But you are. And I think the kind of realisation that it's like that, as a countryman said when my mother died, he said, well, now they're pulling them off our shelf. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You're in the queue, your parents die, and then in your 50s and 60s you realise that your time is short too. Now that's a new spiritual journey, and to be able to embrace that in an easy feeling of being in the present moment. And there's one other thing, I think, that the present moment means love. You know, I say in the book, I cannot be human without you. I need you. Now, I need you now. You, this person in front of me. We always need who we're engaged with. Yeah. And they will make us human if we're just in the present moment with them and accept them.
Last night, Tom McIntyre spoke of the vulnerability you laid bare in the book.
Yeah.
So,
well, not many men like to say, you know, that a man can be emasculated and lose his sense of his pride and his strength and all the rest of it. But when you're sick, sometimes that happens. You become vulnerable because you need other people. And then you realise that you're becoming more human because you're vulnerable.
You say that we need other people, and we do.
Yeah.
We need them to love, to be our strength, our support.
Yeah.
How do you equate that with being a priest and then being in a loving relationship with somebody you love? Is that too much based really to expect of a priest to do without that kind of love, or does he supposed to find that love within the church?
No, I mean, like I left. I was a very short time. You know, I ministered in for a couple of 2 or 3 years, but I was gone before I was ordained because the Polish Pope had come in. The church had gone conservative, and that's not what I signed up for. So, so I was gone, and I'm 25 or 30 years out of it. I think that the tragedy is that the clergy, the middle management within the Roman Catholic Church, failed. They really failed badly by lacking vision and being afraid and being conservative. And now it's kind of irrelevant. The idea of enforced celibacy and the idea of, it being wrong to use contraceptives, it's ridiculous.
It is,
like,
yeah.
it really is. And the fact that women don't have a status, they're not allowed in the breaking of bread, in the giving of the sacraments, in the forgiving of sins. Just think about that. That all the key moments that we say are the core sacred moments within the Christian tradition, well, women are not allowed into those moments. Yeah. Now that, you can say things like, they come up with these silly arguments like, well, we've all different things to do in the church. Some are priests and women who do different things, and we're all equal but different. But that's nonsense. That really is nonsense. The core of the whole Christian tradition in priesthood is about compañeros, the breaking of bread. It's about the sacraments, and the church ruthlessly excludes women. And then goes along and says that, for example, in stuff like abortion, we should make up our minds for women because they can't be trusted, really.
What do you think, the resignation 2 weeks ago of Pope Benedict, that's a big thing, like it hasn't happened in 800 years.
No.
Are people getting nervous now with the future of the church?
I don't know. I think the remnant that's left within the church are probably much more conservative than when I was there. And I certainly don't want to be negative about somebody's faith, because I too have faith.
Yeah.
And I go into the little church here, the convent chapel, when I'm in Dunstores, and I go around the back and go into the chapel, and I will kneel there and I will pray like I did when I was a child. I used to love Christmas morning, going in there for the very early 8 o'clock morning mass and the quiet whispers of the nuns behind the grill.
It was soothing, I guess.
It was beautiful, and I loved it, and I still love it. So I really respect and love, and that as a community we pray. But if you ask me about the politics of the men who run the church, I've really lost interest 30 years ago, because they talk intellectual gobbledygook.
Yeah.
And Ratzinger, this guy who's the last pope, excluded and was vicious to, dozens of theologians, brilliant minds, got their books off the shelves, wouldn't allow people to read them, and then hounded them out of the church. I don't know who will follow him. Yeah. In a sense, I don't really care, because the conversation about love and compassion is going on now at a wider level.
Yeah. That's where spiritualism comes
yeah,
in again.
I think so.
Okay. To go back to your novels, you've written 4 to date.
Right.
Priest.
Yeah.
Bird in the Snow.
Yeah.
The Trouble
with Sarah Gullion. Yeah.
Sarah, and of course, Staring at
Lakes. This
Lakes.
one's Staring at Lakes, yeah.
Yeah, Bird in the Snow, is that your mother?
It is, of course.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything I write, my fiction or my memoir, are created stories. I make up the story, and I write in the Irish Times every Tuesday a column of memoir.
That's right, yeah.
And it's a fiction, but it's absolutely true. If I wrote next week that I met a beautiful woman in Cavan who interviewed me for the radio, it would be true. Right. So Bird in the Snow is a novel I wrote about an old woman on her last days in her own house, when she's trying to resist going into the nursing home, and she wants to stay independent. And I felt, I'd love to write a book about an old woman as a beautiful woman, as a woman who remembers when she was young.
Yeah, I loved
and when she had lovely frocks, and she made lovely meringues, and she danced around, and she was really sexy and beautiful.
That came out in the book, actually. Of her
and yet only what people see in the surface. Like, I work with old people a lot. I still do. At the moment, I'm working in Kinnegad, and I've been recording stories over 3 years that I hope then to make into a one-man show. I love to sit with old people, because in those, sometimes very beautiful faces, and more beautiful because they have aged and suffered in life, they have so many stories and so many memories of when they were young and sexy and beautiful and no contraceptives, but they were still having a good time. And I love when, like last night, I remember one woman came up and we were talking about, I think her name is Teresa Kitson. She'd be a great Cavan woman. She's still there in the world, and this person wanted me to sign it for her. And I was able to say, my mother often told me stories about that woman's father.
your mother had a great involvement with the older people and positive age.
Well, she was one of them.
She was one of them.
She was one of them. My mother used to.
She was a good advertisement.
We took our mother into a nursing home one time at 90 years of age, and the average age of the people in the room was about between 75 and 80. We said to her, "Would you like to stay here?" She says, "No, it's full of old people." I said, "Mother, you're 90.
Yeah, I remember her going round the town in her Ford Escort Mark II, the purple car.
Yeah, you'd be afraid of her. You'd be afraid of her. Because I tell you, if she ran you down, you were in trouble.
She was some character.
She'd tell you dinged me, the front of my car.
Yeah.
She was formidable, but she was a kind of a, I think she became eventually a kind of an icon of Cavan.
She did.
Yeah.
She did. Nellie Harding. The name Nellie Harding.
Coming, yeah.
Nellie Harding. Can I ask you a question as a writer, Michael? You know, you write your stories and they're from memories and from your heart and something you're passionate about. And that's good because it makes a good story. But then, you know, other writers and they've got like wonderful imaginations. You know, you just use your own heart when you're writing. You don't do this, you know, imaginary.
I don't think that there's a difference between your heart and your imagination.
Do you think you imagine what your past was?
I think your imagination and your heart are the one thing, right?
Yeah, okay.
Like our past, everybody kind of invents the past.
Yeah.
And if your heart is bitter, you will kind of
dwell on that.
Dwell on sometimes very negative things. But if you try and keep your heart open in the present moment, you know, in the present moment, if you're finding joy, and you tell yourself in the morning that you're not going out looking for trouble, don't look for trouble. Look for joy, right? And you'll find it.
Yeah. That's called the law of attraction.
Is it?
Yeah.
If you walk down the street with a certain disposition of finding the seeking the joy, it'll be there for you on the street. Now, in that situation, you'll probably invent out of your past the 5% that was beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's what you choose to remember. And that's what I tend to do. I have written dark books like, you know, Priest and the Trouble of Sarah Gullion. But I don't think there's a difference between imagination and the heart.
Okay.
You know.
I like to hear that too because to focus on good things, you know, it does return to you, and
it does.
It does return to you.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've written 19 plays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do a play every year. I've done that as a discipline.
Yeah.
And I did about 6 of them with the Abbey Theatre. And that was great and wonderful. But I knew I'd come to the end of the road on that. That there's this, you know, you can't keep repeating yourself. And I'd done 6. And then I thought I need to do something experimental. So I went out and did kind of, you know, wrote one-man shows based on research, like with Travellers or something like that. And then more recently, I've got involved in doing films. So I was at a premiere in the Dublin Dublin Film Festival there, Black Ice. Had a part in that. And
is that the one where you're walking along the beach?
No. But I've done 3 or 4 films now. I like to communicate, you know. Yeah.
But that is an art form, and that is the art that you like.
Sure, if I could get a job on Cavan TV, I'd be flying. You know. I would.
You might get one after this. Your play, The Misogynist, caused
that caused a story.
It caused a story in its time,
And I think
it was like, you know, it was like not before its time, but just in time.
It was taken off the stage because men reviewers and radio people at the time were saying, "Oh, this is a load of gob. We don't know what's going on here. It shouldn't be put on the stage." It was very clear what was going on. There was one character on the stage who was a cleric, and he was speaking about a woman with contempt and with misogyny. And it was called Misogynist. And I think if you put it on now, people would get very clearly what it's about. Yeah.
So going back to your books again, you've written your book, and hopefully you'll keep writing. Do you think you've more? Is it a memoir, your book?
Yeah, my book.
Is.
This one.
So that's not the end of the line.
No, Staring at Lakes is a memoir, and it just covers kind of one thing. It's the story of, I think, how love comes back to you even when you've lost it. And I was talking to a guy a couple of hours ago on the street in Cavan, and he said that when a certain time in his life he thought he could do better when he'd look at the wife.
Oh dear.
Right? What'll I tell you? And he went through a kind of a negative period in his life, and then about 10 years later, and he was with her all the time, in the one marriage. And about 10 years later, they went on a holiday to Bundoran. And she was walking on the beach and he was looking at her at a distance. And he realised, he said to me, he said, there was a time in my life I thought she was too old for me. And now I realise she's far too young because I've aged quicker. He turned into an old man.
Yeah.
And he saw this beautiful young woman who was his wife.
So love does return.
Oh, I think love is all over the place, you know. It really is. And I think that sometimes we don't see it. It's in the ordinary and we get bored. And sometimes it's good to acknowledge that. Now, Staring at Lakes is a memoir, but I think it's also like any of my books are recording my life. And I hope I go on doing that if I continue, you know, living.
Yeah, well, sharing that is good, and I like that because, as you say, like people do get fed up, they get anxious, and they want to move on.
Yeah.
And nearly, I would equate that with a lot of relationship breakups and people not trying too much. Easy get out clause.
Yeah. Again, like there's no way I'm suggesting that we shouldn't have divorce. I think if a relationship is not working, people should be better to break up and start again. Yeah. But there is a phenomenon, I think, where boys, men, foolishly throw away the treasure of their life and regret it.
I'm glad you said foolishly.
I do think that happens with men because of the kind of our wandering spirit that they have, and they want to be players. There was a young cool woman the other night. We were talking about a guy, and she said, "Oh, he's a player." And she meant what we'd say is a philanderer. You know what I mean? He'd be always wandering somewhere. I think that there's sometimes what happens is that when you have children, a couple have a firstborn child, and it's absolutely a joy, and it's amazing, and then maybe more. And they go through every little thing of the school, and your whole life revolves around this. And you become a different sort of creature. You're no longer a lover.
Yeah.
You know, you can't even have good sex because the child is 9 and in the next room, that kind of stuff. So you become a parent, and all the time you're minding that child, and they're in secondary school, and then finally they do the leaving cert and they go off to college or they get a job or whatever. And at that stage you get two people who have lost the romance in their life, and they've become parents with no child. And the danger is they will then either get bored with each other or bore each other to death by just looking at each other over the table like old donkeys. And that's the stage in life, I think, that people have to reinvigorate their marriage and rediscover the romance and rediscover that this is the young woman that you pursued like hell when you were a young man. You know? So that's...
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That hopefully is the way that it does work out for most people who stay in their relationships, you know?
Yeah.
You have a daughter.
Yeah.
And... what age is she now?
She's 19.
19?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
She's showing any artistic tendencies?
She's done photography.
Oh, that's art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's in Dunleary.
Okay. Yeah. And your wife is a sculptress?
Yeah, my wife, Catherine Carmen is her name, and she's I think one of the foremost Irish figurative sculptors. She does figures in bronze and stone and all that, and has been doing it all her life. You know, she's a member of Ace Dawn, and she's a really great sculptor. And it's great being married to an artist because we understand each other as artists, and I think we give each other freedoms. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. She knows I have to be an individual, and she's an individual. And again, that's the thing that can destroy a marriage, where people become too dependent on each other, and they don't want to give freedom to the other person anymore. They say, "Where are you going?"
Yeah.
You know,
that doesn't work anymore.
You must be able to have complete freedom as a human being and as an artist. So being married to an artist has been for me great.
Artists have got, different perspective on things.
Yeah.
And that's good in a way when you have two people, artistic people together, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, I think that artists really, I don't see them as any more special than anybody else. Art or writing is, to me, it's craft. It's simply,
do you think craft?
Yeah, I do. I think it's all to do with craft. I see myself as a tradesman. And,
interesting, yeah.
I had a plasterer plastering this new building that I put up last year up in Leitrim. And I stood inside that and I said to him, Vincent, if I could write as well as you could plaster, I'd be good. Because that's a craft. And by working at his craft, he makes it beautiful.
I would have thought like writing comes from the heart and the craft comes from your hands, but I won't argue with you.
Okay.
Okay, so well, seeing that is our news program this week, we'll touch on some international news of the week.
Okay.
Okay, what do you think? So, what do you think about the Blade Runner and that bizarre case of did he or did he not shoot his girlfriend in the bathroom?
Well, I think there's two things about that. One is the tragedy that's going on, and secondly is the media obsession with it, right? It's a classic example of where you get a tragedy that's lived out in public, and then that's one thing, but the separate thing is how the media can feed on that. And there's an endless amount of possibilities that you can discuss about that man and his sport and the legs he doesn't have, and the gun in the bed, and her in the bath, and did she take a leak or didn't she? And you know, it becomes prurient, and that in some sense it does sell newspapers. Yeah. Because people are fascinated. So I think that's what's phenomenal about it, is actually the way that people are interested in it. Yeah. Yeah.
That's got a lot to do with, like, people are just reality mad these days. But you're in the media, you write a column in the media, you're a journalist as well. You do journalism. Yeah. How do you feel that the media does throw out these things and direct people in this line of thinking?
I think the media objectifies a tragedy like that. And they do the same they do the same with the Pope,
but they can colour it,
or they do the same with the Queen, or with Kate Middleton. There was a row last week where, you know, somebody was writing about her. There's public rituals, like the Pope is public pageantry, and the Queen in England is public pageantry, and a violent death with a famous celebrity becomes a public pageant. They're probably. It's probably necessary in some way that the society feeds on these things. We live out subconsciously. We are living out our own anxieties, our own ideas.
And the media's feeding that.
People who have a view about the dangers in men will say, "Oh, that fella's guilty." They're unconsciously attaching to him their own perceptions of how men might be dangerous, or they'll say, "Oh, he has a temper." Because unconsciously they may be aware of people who have tempers. Okay. And then some other people will say, he mightn't be that guilty, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, objective.
And when the Queen came to Ireland, there was a whole lot of unconscious healing going on with people. That through her bowing in the Garden of Remembrance, or by shaking, what's his name, McGuinness's hand, that in these public moments you photograph them. Unconsciously, there are people sitting in small little villages up and down Fermanagh and Tyrone who are healed, who feel
big healing.
It's okay because we have seen it now.
Okay. Sometimes, though, the media can get it terribly wrong about people, judging people and throwing out totally the wrong image, and, you know, you're guilty before proven. Yeah. Does the media never really says it's sorry, per se, does it? It never really...
I don't think the media needs to say sorry.
You don't think so?
No, because I really think, even though they make mistakes, and they've made terrible mistakes, the priest, Father Reynolds, over in the west of Ireland, was desperately abused by RTE.
That's right.
There about 6 months or a year ago. Yeah. So they really get it wrong. But I live in a society where you can speak your mind, where you can disagree with stuff, where you can be open, right?
That's fine.
People live in societies all over the world where they don't vote, they can't speak, there's laws against women, you can't play music. You know, like if a media is the price we have to pay for freedom of expression, then let's have loads of tabloids. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the media again it can, though, throw out what it wants people to think about a story.
Well,
it can,
you can put a spin on it. Yeah,
it puts a spin.
You can put a spin on it, but in the end, I think nowadays that could be done when you had one guy controlling the media, like one big mogul, and he owned 5 papers, and you could throw out, you could demonise a particular prime minister in Britain, or you could defend a particular prime minister. Now, in the age of the internet, and Facebook, and Vimeo, and YouTube, there's an enormous democratization of viewpoint, so that we can express ourselves now. Like even the fact that you know, I'm having the joy this evening to be with you on this news programme from Cavan, on Cavan television. That's a sign that, you know, the ability to speak out has become a democratic right, and that stops any one monopoly of power, you know, controlling the views in the media.
Okay, you know media, and you're there in the media. Would it have an influence on you, anything you read or anything you believe in the media, or do you would it have an influence on you yourself?
No, I use it for information.
Okay.
And I think that's where most people begin to.
I do agree with you.
They use it for information. You know, tweets. You get tweets, and somebody tweets something from the New York Times, and you press a button and you're reading the New York Times, and then somebody else tweets something from the Anglo-Celt, and you're reading the Anglo-Celt, the next article. Like that concept of actually being able to read in 10 minutes over a cup of tea in a restaurant, you could read a bit of the New York Times, a bit of the Anglo-Celt, and then something from a book publisher. That's extraordinary. Like 10, 15 years ago, we couldn't have imagined that would happen.
No.
That'd be like science fiction. And that this little computer would be on your phone.
Yeah, so do you think that global media is a very positive thing?
I think it's wonderful.
Positive.
I think it's
Good.
wonderful, yeah. I think it's...
You don't see the danger or the harm in it, like with cyberbullying, you know, and invasion of people's lives. And we have a little instance of a story of the Cavan nanny that's in New York.
Yeah.
And like that girl is just catapulted into, you know, worldwide media frenzy, and she's not even charged at the moment.
Yeah, but do you know what?
But do you not think that's a downside of
No, I
that kind
don't.
of thing? You don't?
I don't, because I think what's more worrying about that case, about that nanny, is not that she's in the media, but that she's not in the media. Because I saw a thing on the Anglo-Celt website today about her.
Yeah.
Now, I hadn't heard anything about her for a year.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, Jesus, she's still in prison, and it hasn't even come to trial yet.
Yeah, she is.
So,
yeah.
so it's like it's not the media; it's the lack of media. There's loads of cases like hers where somebody is in prison and they're on remand, so they're not being charged, and the media can get out their story.
Yeah, so you'd like to use the media to get
of
a
course,
result. To get a
and
result.
if somebody felt that, you know,
It's unfair.
there's something can be done that
Yeah.
that woman is being held unfairly, then the media could be used to get your point across and to campaign for her and that sort of stuff. I think that's wonderful. We lived in Ireland when there was the, what do you call it, censorship of Sinn Féin on the
Yeah, that's
national.
right.
Like, and I lived in Fermanagh, and I knew what was going on, and people down in Dublin hadn't a clue what was going on. Hadn't a clue because there was censorship. Again, that was a period
There
before
was a media
internet.
blackout, yeah.
Yeah.
One last thing,
Yeah.
Michael, we'll mention before we finish. This week, actually tomorrow, the 23rd of February, is the 70th anniversary of the burning of St Clair's
Yeah.
orphanage.
Yeah.
Again, that's another thing that needed to be redressed. You know, not redressed, but what really happened.
Yeah.
Will we ever know? Will we ever?
I think
understand?
people do know. You know, I think there's been books written about the poor Clares in Cavan and the fire and the orphans who died in it. And I think there have been books written that explain it all. And we'll never hear from the nuns now in Cavan because they're all gone and they're all dead and whatever. But what I can't understand still, and I don't mean it vindictively, but the clergy and the church, they still are missing something because they've sidelined themselves from conversation. And it seems that they can't get round their heads that apology is a healthy, human and dignified thing to do. That if I say, I did a thing actually recently, I spoke publicly in Dublin, I think, called Trailblaze, and it's on Vimeo, you can get it on Vimeo, where I spoke about being a man and listening to the Savita Halappanavar case where she died because they wouldn't do an abortion. I felt as a man, I felt ashamed. I felt deeply ashamed that I lived in a country which still is not treating women as proper citizens of the Republic. And so, I'm just coming to the thing about the Magdalene sisters and to the poor Clares. There's nobody, they feel that they have to be defensive, that they can't come out and say, no matter how bad we feel, we're old people now and we're in old homes and we did our best and we did go in thinking it was the right thing to do. But leaving that aside, get over yourself. it still was a terrible mistake and a terrible injustice. And to come out and say, we are deeply sorry. You know, for Sean Brady to express much more sorrow than defensiveness.
Yeah.
You know, when
what is that? What is it power thing?
Sean Brady, the Cardinal,
I know Sean Brady.
he worked through the courts for years trying to keep down the things that were coming. And the things that were coming were only people saying, listen, I'm hurt.
Yeah.
You hurt me.
All they
Please
wanted was
tell me you're sorry.
All they wanted was people to say, you're sorry.
If the church did that, if the church just said, listen, I'm really so sorry, we did it wrong, it was a mistake, you know, but we did it with good intention, like we did believe in Jesus and we wanted to do stuff, but we made a mess and I'm sorry. I've said that to my wife so many times when I burned the cooking. I was really only trying.
Yeah.
And now I made shit of it, but I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And it helps be human to be sorry, because you're inviting somebody to do the most wonderful thing in the world, and that is to forgive. And when Enda Kenny did it in the Dáil, and when you could see that he heartfeltly meant it, it invited this beautiful moment of generosity from victims to start to forgive, and thereby is healing. And without the sorry, they can't forgive. And that's why, and people, you know, in power don't seem to understand that. In order for those people to move on, to feel that they forgive you, Monsignor, you must say sorry.
Yeah. And yet that's one of the things that the church teaches us, is that when you say I'm sorry for my sins, you're forgiven.
I know, the irony is they have this as a core teaching, which is a beautiful and powerful teaching.
Confession,
a teaching that has made, you know, civilization in Europe all the better. The idea of forgiveness. And to be part of that is to say sorry. And sorry is not saying, you know, I just, it still amazes me. It still amazes me that in the past 20 years, even 20 years ago, I think the organised Roman Church, the clergy, could have still pulled everything out of the fire and moved on and become a bigger church, and they still wouldn't. They still refused, and now it's just they're out of the conversation.
Yeah.
To a great degree.
Yeah.
You know.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for sharing that with us. It was fantastic of you to come along this evening. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I really enjoyed listening to your reading last night.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be with you. A real pleasure.
Thank you.